Howdy, folks. Old Saw here with a truly chilling tale for you. And I do mean chilling. So, bundle up and make yourselves comfortable, and we'll get down to the grisly details.
Victims of the Elements by Steve L. Clark. Performed by Don Tackett. Ian Diedrich stared out the window of the research station at the blankets of frozen earth stretching out to the horizon. Snowdrifts rose high against the hillsides. Aside from the occasional blip of exposed black rock, the landscape was a kaleidoscope of whites and blues glittering fiercely as rays of sunlight tried and failed to warm the surface. He dropped his forehead against the window, wincing as the cold seeped through the pane, and closed his eyes. The glass was thick, but not thick enough to stop the howling sounds of the unrelenting Arctic winds from creeping through. It sounded like invisible beasts shrieking at the sky. He had been alone for 8 days. The Sherman Institute of Arctic Research had failed. His partners had fallen victim to the elements. One by one, they perished. Veronica was the last. He saw the fear in her eyes as she took her last breaths. For days, Ian radioed for help. Only silence replied. Eventually, as the solitude frayed his mind, the silence became a voice unto itself. Sometimes it was so loud Ian would drop to the floor, hands over his ears, and scream until his throat burned. It told lies that filled him with hope. The sound of a voice, the sound of rescue. Perhaps he told these lies to himself. Perhaps the silence and his mind had joined forces to entertain each other in the absence of any stimulation. Now, the howling outside a welcome diversion to the pressing quiet, he picked up a new sound. At first, he thought it was another trick. The steady humming sound continued to approach, slowly morphing into a deep whomp, whomp, whomp. When he could no longer resist, he raised his head and opened his eyes. In the distance, a speck appeared in the sky. He had spent long hours staring out that window and was sure this object wasn't there before. The speck grew larger, more defined, closer. Before long, the image cleared enough for him to see the whirling blades atop the helicopter. The whoomp sound intensified to a roar. Snow lifted into the air as gushes of wind battered the ground, as if the gods were recalling the frozen death they had unleashed on this land. A chuckle escaped his throat, then snowballed into hysterical laughter as the unfiltered relief of the landing helicopter overwhelmed him. Rescue. He leapt to his feet, raced across the center room of the research center, and pulled open the door to his living quarters. The bodies of his companions were organized neatly. Heads were lined up along one shelf. Arms were stacked neatly in a pile in the corner. Legs, cut off mid-thigh, stood in a line along the wall. The remaining torsos were piled one atop the other in the opposite corner. This was their resting place. Ian grabbed the fire axe leaning against the wall and carried it back into the center room. He positioned himself behind the door, axe at the ready. At last, the silence would be broken. The elements could be unleashed again. Outside, he heard the unmistakable crunch of approaching footsteps in the snow. Ian Diedrich smiled and waited.
I'd like to thank y'all for stopping by this evening. We always enjoy the company and hope to see y'all again real soon. Until then, remember that horror ain't about us living in darkness. It's about darkness living in us. So, try to stay close to the porch light.